Saving Africa's elephants. A global ivory ban put in place to protect one of the world's endangered species is being called into question. Is it effective enough, or are tougher rules needed? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine. Now, it's been 27 years since a ban on the trade of ivory was imposed in an effort to protect the elephant. But now that ban faces a challenge. Namibia and Zimbabwe want it lifted so that they can sell their own stockpiles of tusks. Now, opponents say that will serve to encourage poaching and lead to the demise of the elephant. Harun Matasa reports now on why Zimbabwe wants the ivory ban lifted.
Zimbabwe's government says it has about 70 tons of raw ivory in storage worth an estimated $35 million. Elephant tusks collected over the years from animals that died from natural causes or seized from poachers. Wildlife officials want an international ban on ivory sales lifted so the country can legally sell piles and piles of these tusks. They say some of the money raised would benefit poor rural communities. People who live in these areas say elephants are dangerous, especially when they stray too close to human settlements and destroy crops. Officials also say people will more likely protect elephants from poachers if they can benefit financially from the animals. It's an initiative that's being called the Campfire Project.
Between 2010 and now, we have lost 68 people from wildlife-related attacks, and these are mainly elephant. And therefore, we are looking to the sale of ivory being the completion of that one missing piece, which will allow our people to better protect the elephant against any form of poaching.
Poachers often use cyanide to kill herds of elephants in the country's national parks. The illegal trade in ivory is big business. Most of the ivory ends up in Asia. Some animal rights activists fear legalizing the trade in ivory wouldn't benefit the poor at all, but could end up helping the lucrative black market.
The people that own the land surrounding the safari parks and all that are all ministers and ministers' families. There's nothing for the communities. The campfire, in Zimbabwe, there's about one or two that are working. The rest have collapsed because the fat cats are just pocketing the money and it's not going to the people where it's supposed to go.
Government officials deny allegations of corruption. Unlike some countries in East and West Africa where numbers are declining, Zimbabwe has more than 80,000 elephants. Wildlife officials say that's too many for the small southern African country to manage effectively. The continuing drought has affected both people and animals. The cashed-out government says selling its stockpile of ivory could help it raise money to finance struggling national parks and drill much-needed boreholes. But it's a divisive and controversial issue. Some in the international community fear if Zimbabwe is allowed to sell its stockpile of ivory worth millions, poaching could increase and even more animals could be systematically targeted for profit. Harun Matasa, Al Jazeera, Harare.
So while elephants are being killed off in many parts of Africa, numbers are rising in southern African countries. Namibia has got more than 20,000. South Africa has got around 27,000. And Zimbabwe has 3 to 4 times as many, with 82,000 elephants. And all three say they can make millions of dollars by selling off their stockpiles of ivory. All right, let's bring in our panel now. Joining us from the Global Summit on Wildlife Conservation taking place in Johannesburg is Namibia's Minister of Environmental Affairs, Pohamba Shifeta. From Nairobi, we have Paula Kahumbu, who joins us via Skype. She represents the Kenyan delegation at the Conservation Summit and has advised the Kenyan government. Also in Johannesburg is Colman, who is a wildlife trade specialist for the World Wildlife Fund. Thank you all very much indeed. But can I start with you, Minister? And we've heard a little bit about the case that Zimbabwe is making for the ban on ivory trade to be lifted. Tell us what your case is. What is the situation from Namibia's point of view?
Yes, from Namibia's point of view, we support the proposal by Zimbabwe because of the fact that this Namibia, just like Zimbabwe, we should be able to use our natural resources as long as we do that sustainably. Now, we have stockpiles, and these are tons, tens of thousands of tons, and we can generate the much needed money from these tons of stockpiles. And I can also tell you that the management of this stockpile is very costly. And now it costs us a lot of money to store these resources instead of selling these resources, and the proceeds from these resources, we plow back this into conservation of our wild animal. And this money, from Namibia's case point of view, it normally goes back into the conservation programs.
And tell us how big is your stockpile and how much you could possibly make from the sale of it?
We have tens of thousands of tons, and we will definitely make more than 100 million in this dollars in this stockpiles if we are allowed to dispose of in a market, in an international market.
And if
it
you
is
were
something that we cannot
Minister,
afford to throw away.
If you were allowed to sell that, how would that $100 million be spent in Namibia?
This will be, of course, this is much needed resources. We will spend this in nature conservation programs in our parks, with our community conservation programs. We know that Namibia has a program which has been a successful program, community conservancies, and these community conservancies, we have human-wildlife conflict going on there. We need to also put up infrastructure, water points for wildlife, especially in conservancies. Right now, we have even a dry up. One of our river streams has is dried up, and we need to have water installation there.
Okay, all right. So you would plough the money back. You'd plough the money back into conservation areas. So Paula, can I take what the minister has said and put it to you? Why shouldn't Namibia and Zimbabwe be allowed to sell off what are their own resources? Why shouldn't they? They need the money.
Well, of course they need the money. We all need money. Every country in Africa that has elephants needs additional support to protect them. And the reason that elephants need protection so dramatically right now is because the sales of ivory that took place in 2002 and 2009 by Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa, and Botswana led to this massive surge in poaching because it triggered demand. Now, in the last few years, we've really come to understand how serious that explosion of poaching has been. The latest studies suggest that we've lost more than 30% of Africa's elephants just in the last few years. Tanzania had a population bigger than Zimbabwe. It's been reduced by over 70% in just 4 years. And this is what can happen. Tanzania didn't sell her ivory, but because the other countries sold their ivory, Tanzania's elephants were targeted. And so these countries need to take responsibility for the impact of their policy decisions and their lobbying and the society's decisions that take place, the impact that it has on elephants elsewhere. That the money that they are going to get from the sale of this ivory will not help Tanzania or Kenya or any other country. It actually, the cost of looking after elephants as a result of the surge in poaching far exceeds any amount of money that these two countries could get from the sale of their ivory.
And Colman, can I quickly get your view then on this? Presumably WWF does not support at all the lifting of the ban, be it temporary, be it in part or in full, in order to facilitate the sale of this stockpile.
No, we don't support the ban, nor do we support some of the measures that are proposed by Kenya and other countries that would purportedly make the ban tighter. We think the ban is sufficiently strict as it is. It doesn't allow further ivory sale. Just to say a word about Namibia and Zimbabwe's proposals and also some of Kenya's comments. We don't share the view that the one-off sales were the cause of the poaching crisis, but it's also fair to say that they didn't meet the predictions of the pro-trade lobby that they would undercut the poachers and remove the incentive to poach. Poaching continued to rise as it had been doing before the one-off sales took place. And so to that extent, when you look at what Namibia and Zimbabwe are proposing, they're proposing trade of ivory under much, much freer conditions than happened in the one-off sale. Effectively, they would be able to sell it to any country that wanted to buy it, irrespective of whether or not that country had adequate governance in place. Some of these countries that still have a demand for legal ivory have huge illegal markets, and this would only complicate the governance. So yes, we do believe it is too much of a risk.
All right, coming back to you, Minister. If you were to get $100 million for the sale of this ivory, you would actually be responsible for an increase in poaching, perhaps in other countries, while maybe Namibia can afford to lose some of its elephants because you're looking quite healthy right now. Other countries aren't. So you've been described as being short-termist and selfish.
Yes, let me just make one point clear here. I think there is a kind of confusion here. Up to now, I have been asking the scientific relationship between disposing of the elephant products legally in the international market and the increment of poaching. To me, there is no scientific relation between the two. They have not, up to now, been able to conclude scientifically that by selling in the market legally, in the international market, will then fuel the poaching higher. So in Namibia, we have things under control, and we have overpopulation of animals. And we have, apart from what we have now in the stockpile. So what we are trying to request is that we just want to dispose of these natural resources, and then the proceeds from there we pour back in the conservation of our wildlife. So nothing more, nothing less. And I think countries should be allowed to exercise their sovereignty rights to sell their stockpiles.
Okay, Paula, thank you, Minister.
Them or throwing them away.
Paula, the Minister contends that there's no scientific link, there's no empirical evidence suggesting a link between the one-off sales that have happened in the past and a rise in poaching. So what's wrong? Why can't Namibia sell what are its natural resources that belong to the people of that country?
So there has been a contention, perhaps if you look at the CITES data that comes out of the MIC process, as well as the ETIS data, what you will see physically by just looking at graphs is that after 2008, when that ivory was sold, poaching went up and ivory trafficking also went up. Now, what the minister is saying is right. There is no scientific proof that one thing is linked to the other. But what you can see is a very clear correlation. And a scientific paper that was published by Princeton University just in the last few weeks says that this is a direct correlation, that these two things are linked. Now, this is a scientific authority at a prestigious institution. The CITES authority have said they have looked at this study and they are not convinced. But one of the biggest problems that I've had with this whole process has been that data has been collected from across Africa and across the world on not only on the elephants and their deaths, but also on the ivory movements. And these data have been held by only certain institutions. So no Kenyan university has had access to that data to do an independent analysis. And this is the very first time an independent analysis has been done by Princeton University. It's one of the Ivy League schools. And it says that there is a direct link. So, I mean, for me, the risk is this, that we continue going down the road of saying there is no direct proof. You wouldn't do that with Ebola. You wouldn't do that with anything else that threatens people. Why is it that we're willing to put the future of elephants at risk because of two countries who want to sell their ivory? This doesn't make sense to me. Surely we reached a point in our human evolution where we can see that we don't need to have the exact proof in order to understand what is happening. Elephants are dying at a rate of 100 individuals per day because of demand. And those ivory stockpiles that Namibia and Zimbabwe want to sell are to feed that demand. And of course, what that will do is create more demand.
All
and
right.
Therefore, more elephants will die. It's to me, it's actually really obvious. And I totally understand that these countries have needs. Overpopulation is a completely unrelated issue. And I think it's unfair to bring it into this conversation.
Okay, Colman, so we have this proposal then that's on the table at the CITES conference by Namibia and by Zimbabwe. But there are other African countries like Kenya, like South Sudan, that don't agree with the proposal put forward by them and instead would like to tighten up the existing regulation, which some say is ambiguous. It's certainly confusing in that some countries can sell a little bit of ivory some of the time. Isn't that the case?
No, that's not really the case. The present rules are quite clear. They did allow ivory to be sold in 2008. They have some very, very narrow exceptions for tourist souvenirs made of ivory, some of which would apply even under the rules that Kenya and others are proposing. But otherwise, commercial trade in ivory is banned, and that can only be changed by the conference taking a vote by 2/3 majority, which we think is unlikely to happen. We would rather that this question wasn't reduced to a simple one of whether the problem can be solved either by allowing more trade or by further restricting trade. A lot of work has been done on which countries are the weak links in the trade chain. 19 so far have been identified. Source, transit and consumer countries. 7 of these are in Asia, 12 of them in Africa. Of those that are in Africa, regrettably, 9 are members of the coalition that's supporting the call for a tighter ban. And the reason why these countries are weak links varies, but it's often down to lack of political will, legislative loopholes, and so on. Paula has mentioned correctly the catastrophic poaching in Tanzania in recent years. There are numerous reasons for this, including corruption and weak governance, but also the fact that most of the ivory that's leaving Tanzania is going through Zanzibar, where, because of a legislative loophole, normal CITES rules don't apply. And so there's no mandate or obligation on the authorities to stop contraband.
All right.
And that's also affecting shipments from other countries too.
OK, let's talk about the destination of this ivory a little bit later on. First, let me go back to the Minister, Minister Shifeta, and ask you more about what is the human and the economic cost of managing a very large population of elephants? Because people actually die, they lose their crops, don't they?
Yes, I think that is a good question. I want us to study, to make case studies from country to country and get all the merits and demerits of each country's programs, management programs of their wildlife. We will find that Namibia has succeeded, and we are using programs, we are using the local communities. These are the local community who live with these animals, the excruciating conflict with these animals. They suffer. Their livestock have been eaten up by lions. Their crops fields have been destroyed. Their water installations have been destroyed. Their properties have been destroyed. Now, what you have to do is to give them incentives, because now you have such a large population of elephants roaming freely in local communities, and in order to offset the cost, you need to give them incentives.
But forgive me for interrupting, Minister.
These people to
Forgive me for interrupting you, but surely it comes then it's incumbent upon government to manage the population, to manage the population of elephant, as well as to make sure that local communities see that they are invested in the well-being of their wildlife. I mean, that comes down to government, doesn't it?
Yes, it is. The government has to make sure that we put up the balance. We look at the balance. We look at the balance between the local communities who are living with the animals and also the wildlife programs. That's why we need to make sure that when there's overpopulation in certain areas, we see either we translocate those animals to other areas, but for now we have so much loss of habitats. So most of these animals are living side by side with local community
All right,
members.
okay.
And
Paul,
they share the same habitat.
Okay.
And therefore conflicts.
Minister, thank you for that. Paula, let's look at the consumer side of things, because it's all very well and good having a ban in the trade of ivory at source, but what about demand? Demand for ivory products is still rampant, particularly in Asia, specifically in China.
So, yeah, thank you for that. I wanted to mention that the comment that was made earlier by World Wildlife Fund, I think, is very unfair to put all the blame on the African countries. And yes, there are countries that are struggling with addressing the enforcement costs of under so much pressure of poaching and trafficking of ivory. And Kenya is one of those countries. And we have, I can't tell you what it has taken to turn things around in these countries. It's required some very innovative approaches, collaborations between organizations and the government. But none of this would have been necessary if there was no demand, right? None of this would have been necessary if that demand had not been triggered in China in particular in 2008. And the Chinese government has come out very strongly last year to say that they are going to ban the domestic trade of ivory in that country. Now, just by making that statement alone, the price of ivory dropped by 50%. Now, this is enormous. And what it's done is, I think, had a huge impact across the continent, that there isn't the same level of profitability for the criminal cartels who are involved in these crimes. I think we should remember that this is not the same situation we were in the 1980s. It was much simpler in those days. We're now talking about trans-global criminals. And we've seen this in Kenya, we've seen it in Tanzania. People who are moving ivory, exchanging it for guns that are causing conflicts in countries like Congo, where Joseph Kony is using those guns and he's abducting children and killing people.
All right.
Guns which are being used in the Sudan.
Let me take that point that you make, Paula, and then put that to Colman, because it sounds from what Paula's saying as if not enough attention is being paid to the end destination of this product, of this illicit product for ivory, and that, in fact, international criminal gangs have taken over the trade of ivory.
Well, we would certainly agree that in practice, most of the issues that have arisen around illegality in the markets have been in consumer countries. We did say earlier that not all of the countries of concern are in Africa. 7 of them are in Asia, and that includes China, Vietnam, and Thailand. And yes, we welcome China's decision to phase out its domestic ivory markets. But we must also be realistic and look at the fact that despite China having banned the sale of tiger bone and rhino horn as long ago as 1993, poaching of those species has continued. And this reflects the fact that a ban doesn't necessarily remove demand.
All right.
There is a strong cultural attachment to these wildlife products in China.
All right.
And so it will take more than a ban. It will take action across the trade chain.
Thank you, Colman. I'd like to give the last word to our Minister from Namibia, Minister Pohamba Shifeta. It sounds as though you're unlikely to get the 2/3 support that you need in this CITES conference. What will Namibia do then?
Yes, we will definitely look for the market to dispose of the products we have in our stockpile. It will, of course, lift the pressure of keeping this stockpile and the cost to keep this stockpile and the management. And again, we get the needed, much needed resources to plow back into our conservation programs.
All right. Can I thank you all? Minister Pohamba Shifeta, Colman O'Criaden and Paula Kahumbu. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part in this conversation. And as ever, thank you for watching. You can see this programme again anytime you like on the website, aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter, our handle @AJ Inside Story. From me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.